The lawyer read the will out loud while my daughter-in-law squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. When he finally said the sentence that changed everything, the room went silent. I hereby leave my primary residence, all company shares, and the remaining trust assets to my eldest son, Aaron Whitmore. That was it. No mention of me. No acknowledgement of the woman who had been married to Daniel Whitmore for 32 years. No reference to the wife who had stood beside him when his company was nothing but a folding table in a rented warehouse. No inheritance. No house. No protection. Just what's excluded. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. I was 61 years old, sitting in a leather chair that smelled faintly of lemon polish, staring at a mahogany desk that had probably cost more than my first car. My ears rang as if someone had struck a bell inside my skull. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sounding too calm for how violently my heart was pounding. "Did you say that correctly?" The lawyer glanced up, uncomfortable. "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore." Mrs. Whitmore. The title felt hollow now. Across the table, Aaron shifted in his seat. He didn't look surprised. That detail lodged itself in my chest like a shard of glass. His wife, Melissa, finally released my hand and folded her arms, lips pressed into a thin, victorious line. I realized then that this wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. My husband had died 6 weeks earlier. A sudden stroke. No warning. One moment, he was complaining about the coffee being too weak the next. He was on the kitchen floor, his eyes unfocused, my voice unable to pull him back. I had barely finished mourning him when this happened. "Aaron," I said, turning toward my stepson. "You didn't know about this, did you?" He avoided my eyes. Dad made his choices. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Daniel and I had built everything together. When his first marriage collapsed, he was drowning in debt and bitterness, raising a teenage son who hated me on sight. I walked into that mess willingly. I stayed when Aaron slammed doors, skipped school, called me by my first name instead of stepmother. I stayed when Daniel worked 80-hour weeks and came home too tired to speak. I stayed when Aaron crashed his first car and Daniel dipped into our savings to fix it. I stayed when Aaron dropped out of college twice. I stayed when Daniel fell ill for the first time and I became his nurse, his accountant, his gatekeeper. And now after all of that, I was being erased with a few sentences on thick white paper. There must be something else, I said, gripping the arms of the chair. A provision. A trust. Something. The lawyer cleared his throat. "There is a small allowance, a monthly stipend for living expenses." How much, I asked. He named a number so small I actually laughed. It came out sharp and bitter. "That wouldn't even cover the property taxes," I said. Melissa finally spoke. "You can always downsize." Downsize. We were sitting in the living room of a mansion overlooking the lake. My home. The house I had decorated, repaired, protected. The house Daniel had promised would always be mine. I looked at Aaron again. "You're going to let this happen?" He met my eyes then, and what I saw there wasn't guilt. It was relief. Dad wanted to keep things in the family, he said. "You understand." I understood perfectly. I was never family to them. I was a placeholder, a caretaker, a convenience. The lawyer slid a folder toward me. "We'll need you to sign here acknowledging receipt of the will." My hand hovered over the pen. If I signed, I accepted everything. If I didn't, I was declaring war. I thought of the nights I slept on a hospital chair. The years I postponed my own dreams. The way Daniel used to say, "I don't know what I'd do without you." I set the pen down. "I need time," I said. Aaron frowned. "This is straightforward." "No," I replied, standing slowly. "This is anything but." As I walked out of the office, my legs trembled. But beneath the shock, beneath the grief, something else was forming. A question. Why would Daniel do this? Because as hurt as I was, one truth gnawed at me. My husband had never been careless, not with money, not with people. And he had loved me, which meant either I had been wrong about everything, or someone had made sure this will said exactly what they wanted it to say. I didn't cry when I got home. That surprised me. I walked through the front door, set my purse on the entry table, and stood there listening to the house breathe. The soft hum of the refrigerator. The distant tick of the grandfather clock Daniel insisted on keeping, even though it was always 5 minutes fast. This house knew me. It had absorbed my footsteps, my arguments, my laughter. The idea that I was suddenly a guest in it felt absurd. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands steady now, and sat at the kitchen table. The same table where Daniel and I had signed our first business loan. The same table where he had once sworn hand over mine that I would always be protected. I replayed the lawyer's words in my head over and over. Primary residence, company shares, trust assets. All to Aaron. Daniel had been meticulous. Every document labeled, every folder, color-coded. He kept copies of everything, which meant if this will existed, there were others. And if there were others, there could be differences. I stood up and went to the study. Aaron had never liked that room. He called it the vault, floor-to-ceiling shelves, filing cabinets, a safe hidden behind a framed photo of Daniel and me on our anniversary in Santa Fe. My hands shook slightly as I moved the picture aside and entered the code. The door opened with a soft click. Inside were stacks of folders, each labeled in Daniel's neat handwriting. Tax returns, insurance policies, property deeds. And then I saw it. A thin blue folder marked Estate Draft 2. Draft. My pulse quickened. I pulled it out and sat down, flipping through the pages. My breath caught as I read. The house was listed jointly. The trust split evenly. A provision guaranteeing me lifetime residency control of the company voting shares and a protective clause preventing any sale without my consent. This was the Daniel I knew. This was his voice. My fingers traced the date at the top of the page. 8 months before his death, which meant something had changed. I went back to the safe, searching deeper. Behind the blue folder was another. Red, Estate Final. I opened it slowly. The language was colder, shorter. My name appeared only once, in the stipend clause. The signature at the bottom looked like Daniel's, but something about it felt off, too sharp, too rushed. I leaned back, my heart pounding. Someone had convinced him to change it, or someone had changed it for him. My phone buzzed. A text from Aaron. We should talk. The lawyer says things can get messy if you don't cooperate. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Cooperate. That word sealed it. I thought of Melissa's smile, of Aaron's lack of surprise, of the way Daniel's health had declined rapidly in the last year. Right around the time Aaron had moved back into our lives, suddenly attentive, suddenly helpful. Too helpful. I poured myself a glass of wine this time and took a slow sip. I wasn't a young woman anymore. I didn't have decades to rebuild. This house, this security, this dignity mattered. But more than that, so did the truth. If Daniel had been manipulated, if his vulnerability had been used against him, if my loyalty had been repaid with betrayal, then I wouldn't just accept being excluded. I would respond quietly, carefully, legally. I pulled out my laptop and searched for one thing. Probate litigation attorney. The screen filled with names. Somewhere out there was someone who would help me pry this open inch by inch. I closed the safe, replaced the photo, and looked around the study one last time. They thought I would fold. They thought grief would make me weak. They were wrong, because I wasn't just a widow. I was a woman who had been underestimated for decades. And the people who did this were about to learn what happens when you mistake patience for powerlessness. I met my lawyer 3 days later in an office that smelled faintly of coffee and old books. Her name was Rachel Coleman. She was in her late 40s, wore her gray hair unapologetically natural, and listened without interrupting. That alone told me I had chosen correctly. She didn't rush me. She let the silence stretch while I explained the will, the drafts, the signatures. When I finished, she leaned back and folded her hands. Let me ask you something, she said. In the last year of your husband's life, who had access to him when you weren't around? The answer came too easily. Aaron. And who scheduled his appointments? Who handled his emails? Who spoke to his financial advisor? My stomach tightened. Also, Aaron. Rachel nodded slowly. Then this isn't just an inheritance dispute. This could be undue influence. The phrase settled over me like a heavy blanket. Undue influence. It sounded clinical, almost gentle, but I knew what it meant. Manipulation, pressure, exploiting weakness. He wasn't incompetent, I said quickly. Daniel was sharp, even at the end. I'm not saying he wasn't, Rachel replied. But capacity isn't all or nothing. If someone isolates a vulnerable person, controls information, or pressures them emotionally, a court can take that very seriously. I thought of the last Thanksgiving Daniel was alive. Aaron had insisted on hosting. Melissa had hovered, refilling Daniel's glass before I could stop her laughing too loudly at his jokes. Every time I tried to talk business, Aaron would cut in. Let Dad rest. At the time, I had been grateful. Now I felt foolish. Rachel slid a legal pad toward me. I need a toss line. Dates, changes in behavior. Anyone who can corroborate. I wrote until my hand ached. Doctor visits Aaron attended alone. Meetings I wasn't told about. The afternoon Daniel mentioned changing the will just to keep the peace. I didn't push, I admitted. I didn't want to stress him. Rachel's gaze softened. That's how this happens. When I left her office, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I wasn't imagining things. Heavier because pursuing this meant tearing open wounds that hadn't begun to heal. That evening, Aaron showed up unannounced. I was in the kitchen chopping onions when I heard his footsteps. He didn't knock. He never had. We need to talk, he said. I didn't turn around. You should have called. You didn't answer my messages. I set the knife down carefully. What do you want, Aaron? He sighed, the same practiced sigh he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. I don't understand why you're making this so hard. Dad made his wishes clear. Did he? I faced him, because I've seen another version of those wishes. His eyes flickered, just for a second. You went into the safe, he said. Yes, I replied evenly. The safe in my house. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're chasing ghosts. That draft was old. It was 8 months old, I said, and it protected me. He stepped closer. You're grieving. That messes with perception. I felt the familiar urge to placate him to smooth things over. I pushed it down. I've hired a lawyer, I said. The air shifted. His face hardened. This will get ugly, he warned. It already is, I said quietly. He leaned in, lowering his voice. If you push this, you could lose even that stipend. I met his stare. Then I'll lose it knowing I didn't let myself be erased. He straightened mask back in place. You're making a mistake. As he walked out, I noticed something I hadn't before. He didn't look angry. He looked scared. The first letter arrived a week later. Cease and desist. Aaron's attorney accused me of harassment of attempting to interfere with the execution of a lawful will. The language was aggressive, almost theatrical. It made me smile. People don't escalate unless they feel threatened, Rachel agreed. This tells me we're on the right path, she said over the phone. They're trying to intimidate you. What do? We respond calmly, she said, and we dig. Digging turned out to be uglier than I expected. Rachel subpoenaed Daniel's financial advisor, then his private nurse, then his former assistant, who had quietly quit 6 months before Daniel died. Patterns emerged. Aaron had changed Daniel's email password, redirected bank statements, scheduled meetings during times he knew I volunteered at the library. He had framed it as help. Every witness said the same thing. Aaron said you wanted him to handle it. I felt sick hearing my own name used like that. Then came the medical records. Daniel's neurologist noted increased confusion during periods of stress, emotional distress, exacerbating symptoms, recommendations for limited decision-making during flare-ups. Those appointments had all been with Aaron. Rachel laid everything out on her conference table like pieces of a puzzle. This doesn't guarantee we win, she said. But it's strong. I nodded. I don't need to win everything. I need the truth. Meanwhile, Aaron launched a campaign. Friends stopped calling. Invitations dried up. I overheard whispers at the grocery store. A woman I'd known for 20 years avoided my eyes. Melissa was talking. She's greedy. She's trying to take what isn't hers. She's not even his real mother. That last one hurt more than I expected. On Christmas Eve, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the tree Daniel and I had decorated together. I thought about how easy it would be to quit, to accept the stipend, to move somewhere smaller and pretend none of this mattered. But then I remembered signing business contracts with men who underestimated me. I remembered staying calm while they lost their tempers. This was no different. Rachel called 2 days later. We have something. Aaron had moved money, large sums, from the company into a holding account Melissa controlled. Why, I asked. To prepare for litigation, Rachel said. Or to hide assets. The word betrayal took on a new weight. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the company Daniel built, the employees who depended on it. We file a petition to freeze transfers, Rachel said. Emergency hearing. I agreed without hesitation. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I lay in bed listening to the wind replaying Daniel's voice in my head, wondering if he had known what Aaron was doing, wondering if he had tried to stop it. At the courthouse the next morning, Aaron avoided my eyes. Melissa stared at me openly, her smile thin and sharp. The judge listened, asked questions, took notes. When he finally spoke, his words were measured. Until this matter is resolved, all transfers are suspended. Melissa's smile vanished. Aaron's jaw clenched. I felt something loosen in my chest. It wasn't victory, but it was the first crack in the wall they had built around me. And for the first time since the will was read, I felt something close to hope. End of chapters 3 and 4. If this story is resonating with you, stay with me. The next chapters are where the real consequences begin. The injunction changed everything. It didn't make headlines. It didn't come with gavel slams or dramatic speeches. But it stopped Aaron's momentum, and that mattered more than noise. Money froze. Decisions stalled. The company, once his playground, suddenly required explanations again. He called me that night. I don't know what you think you're doing, he said without greeting. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, breathing in slowly before answering. I'm protecting what your father built. You're destroying it, he snapped. Employees are panicking. Clients are asking questions. Good, I said. Maybe they'll finally hear the truth. There was a pause. When he spoke again, his voice dropped into something colder. You don't want to do this to me. The way he said me told me everything. Not the company, not his family, himself. I didn't want to bury my husband alone either, I replied. But here we are. He hung up. Rachel warned me the next move would be personal. She was right. 2 days later, a courier delivered a thick envelope. Inside was a petition challenging my residency in the house. Aaron claimed Daniel had intended to sell the property and relocate before his death. The implication was clear. I was overstaying my welcome. He's trying to scare you out, Rachel said. If you leave voluntarily, it strengthens his position. I'm not leaving, I said. This house is my last line of defense. That night, I walked through every room like I was memorizing it. The scratch on the banister from when Daniel dropped a toolbox. The faded mark on the wall where we once argued about paint color. These weren't assets. They were proof of life. The next escalation came from Melissa. She cornered me at the charity luncheon Daniel used to sponsor every spring. Her hand gripped my elbow with a familiarity she hadn't earned. "You're embarrassing yourself," she whispered, smiling for the room. "People are talking." I leaned closer. "Let them." She laughed softly. "You really think this ends well for you?" I looked at her face, perfectly composed, perfectly cruel. "I think you're scared," I said. Her smile flickered. That evening, Rachel called with urgency. "We've uncovered emails between Aaron and Melissa." My stomach tightened. About what? About timing, about isolating Daniel, about how long they thought he had. Silence filled the line. "They were planning," Rachel continued, "months in advance. The betrayal settled in my bones. This wasn't opportunism, this was strategy." We filed an amended complaint the next morning, adding claims of conspiracy and financial exploitation. The language was brutal, necessary. Aaron's response was immediate. He went to the press. An article appeared online by afternoon. The headline painted me as a bitter stepmother attempting to seize control from a grieving son. Quotes from unnamed sources described me as difficult and emotionally unstable. I stared at the screen, my hands cold. Rachel was calm. "This is risky for him. Discovery cuts both ways." "But people believe it," I said. She paused. "Only until they don't." That night, I dreamed of Daniel. He was standing in the study, flipping through papers, shaking his head. I tried to reach him, but he faded like smoke. I woke with my heart racing. This was no longer just a legal fight. It was a reckoning. The deposition broke him. Aaron walked into the conference room with his shoulders squared, his suit tailored to project authority. He looked every inch the confident executive. I almost admired the performance. "Almost," Rachel began gently. Background questions, his role in the company, his involvement in Daniel's care. Then she started asking about dates. "Do you recall attending a meeting with your father's financial advisor on March 15th? "Yes." "Was your stepmother present?" "No." "Why not?" He hesitated. "She was busy." "With what?" "I don't remember." Rachel nodded and moved on, only to circle back later with emails proving I had never been informed of the meeting. Each contradiction was small, on its own harmless, together devastating. Then came the question that changed his posture. "Did you ever instruct your father's assistant to withhold information from Mrs. Whitmore?" Aaron straightened. "No." Rachel slid a document across the table. "This is an email from you stating, and I quote, 'Don't loop her in. Dad doesn't need the stress.' Is that your email?" His jaw tightened. "Yes." "And did your father request that?" "No." Silence pressed down on the room. Melissa was deposed next. She fared over. She denied controlling the holding account until bank records contradicted her. Denied discussing Daniel's health until text messages surfaced. Denied influencing the will until an audio recording emerged. The nurse. She had recorded a conversation afraid of being blamed later. In it, Melissa's voice was clear. "We need this settled before he gets worse." "Before he gets worse?" Rachel played the recording in the deposition room. Melissa went pale. "I didn't mean it like that," she said weakly. But the words were already out in the world, impossible to pull back. Afterward, Aaron avoided me entirely. Melissa stopped attending hearings. Their lawyer asked for continuances. Rachel smiled for the first time since this began. "They're bleeding." The settlement offer arrived a week later. The house restored, a substantial financial payout, voting control of the company returned to me for life. Confidentiality clauses, no admission of wrongdoing. I read it twice. "They're trying to buy silence," I said. "Yes," Rachel agreed, "and peace." I stared out the window. The trees were turning leaves, drifting down like slow confessions. "I don't want peace yet," I said. "I want accountability." Rachel studied me. "This goes to trial, it gets ugly." "Public." "I know. You'll be attacked. Again." "I've been attacked my whole life," I replied quietly. "I'm still standing." She nodded. "Then we prepare." The trial date was set for early fall. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same place where Daniel once promised me forever. I placed my hand on the wood, grounding myself. They thought I would take the deal and disappear. They thought money would end this. They forgot one thing. I wasn't fighting for assets anymore. I was fighting for my name. And once that kind of fight begins, it doesn't end quietly. The trial turned my life into a public spectacle. By the second day, the courtroom benches were full. Strangers whispered my name like it belonged to a character in a show they'd paid to watch. I kept my eyes forward, my spine straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I refused to look small. Aaron sat at the defense table, shoulders slumped, now the confidence drained from him. Melissa wasn't there. Her absence spoke louder than her presence ever had. Rachel opened with facts, not emotion. Dates, transfers, medical notes, emails. She let the story assemble itself piece by piece like a slow, inevitable reveal. When it was my turn to testify, the room felt too warm. I took the oath and sat down the microphone inches from my mouth. I could hear my own breathing. "Mrs. Whitmore," Rachel said gently, "how long were you married to Daniel?" 32 years, I replied. "And during that time, what role did you play in the company?" I described the early days, the bookkeeping at night, the contracts I reviewed. the lunches I packed when Daniel couldn't leave the office. I spoke plainly. No exaggeration. The truth didn't need it. Then came the harder questions. How did you feel when you learned you were excluded from the will? The words caught in my throat. I swallowed. It felt like being erased, I said, like my life with him had been rewritten without my consent. The defense attorney stood. Objection. Speculative. The judge waved him down. Overruled. I continued. I trusted my husband, and I trusted his son. That trust was used against me. The defense tried to rattle me. They asked about arguments, about disagreements, about moments when Daniel and I weren't perfect. I didn't deny any of it. Yes, I said calmly. We argued. We were human, but we were partners. Then came the question they thought would break me. Isn't it true, the attorney asked, that you stood to gain significant control if this will were overturned? I met his eyes. Isn't it true, I replied, that I already had that control before it was taken from me? A murmur rippled through the room. During a recess, I sat alone in a quiet hallway. My knees ached. My mouth was dry. Rachel handed me a bottle of water. You did well, she said. I'm not done, I replied. Neither was Aaron. That afternoon, he took the stand. He tried to cry. Came out awkward, his face tightening in ways that didn't reach his eyes. He spoke about pressure, about responsibility, about wanting to honor his father. Then Rachel stood. Aaron, she said evenly, did your father ever tell you he wanted to leave his wife without protection? No, he said quickly. Did he ever express concern that she would misuse company resources? No. Then why did you take steps to isolate him from her? He shifted. I didn't isolate him. I helped him. By changing passwords, by managing stress, by withholding information, silence. Rachel waited. I was trying to keep things calm, he finally said. For whom, she asked. He looked at the table. The judge's eyes narrowed. Court adjourned early that day. As I left, reporters called out questions. I ignored them, my heart pounding. That night, alone in the house, I felt the weight of everything I had unleashed. There was no going back, no quiet resolution. I poured a glass of wine and stood in the study, staring at Daniel's photo. I hope I'm doing the right thing, I whispered. The house didn't answer, but somewhere deep inside a steadiness held. The verdict loomed, and I sensed it wouldn't just change the future. It would expose the past. The final witness was the one no one expected. On the morning of the verdict, Rachel arrived with a thin smile and a thick folder. We have a surprise, she said. My stomach tightened. Good or bad, that depends on your definition. The witness was Daniel's former financial advisor, the one Aaron had replaced 6 months before Daniel's death. He took the stand with visible reluctance, his hands clasped tightly. I didn't want to get involved, he admitted, but my conscience wouldn't let me stay silent. He described a meeting Daniel had requested shortly before he fell ill. A private meeting. No Aaron, no Melissa. Daniel was confused, the advisor said. He asked me why certain documents had changed. He said he didn't remember approving them. The courtroom went still. He asked me to retrieve the previous draft of his will. The advisor continued. When I told him it had already been replaced in the system, he was upset. He said someone must have misunderstood his intentions. Rachel stepped forward. Did he name who that someone might be? Yes, the advisor said quietly. He said Aaron had been insisting on changes, that he felt pressured. Aaron's lawyer objected, his voice sharp. The judge overruled him. And did Daniel intend to revise the will again? Rachel asked. Yes, the advisor said. He told me he wanted to restore protections for his wife. We scheduled an appointment. My breath caught. Did that appointment happen? Rachel asked. No, he said. Daniel suffered his stroke 2 days later. I felt something inside me collapse and rebuild at the same time. Grief and vindication twisted together, painful and necessary. The judge recessed briefly before delivering the verdict. I stared at the wall, my thoughts loud. If Daniel had lived just a little longer, if I had pushed harder, if I had noticed sooner. Rachel touched my arm. This isn't on you. When the judge returned, everyone stood. His voice was firm, deliberate. The court finds sufficient evidence of undue influence, financial manipulation, and breach of fiduciary duty. My heart hammered. The contested will is invalidated. A gasp rippled through the room. The prior estate draft is reinstated in full. I closed my eyes. Furthermore, the judge continued this court orders restitution of misappropriated funds and refers the matter for further investigation. Aaron's face drained of color. The gavel struck. It was over. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different, lighter, sharper. I inhaled deeply as if for the first time in months. Reporters surged forward. Rachel shielded me. Mrs. Whitmore, someone called. Do you feel victorious? I paused. No, I said. I feel honest. At home that evening, I walked through the house slowly. Everything was where it had always been. And yet nothing was the same. My phone buzzed. A message from Aaron. I'm sorry, I never meant for it to go this far. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I set the phone down without replying. Because apologies offered after exposure are not remorse. They are fear. And fear, I had learned, was the first step of karma finding its way home. End of chapters 7 and 8. If you're still listening, stay with me. The next chapters reveal what justice looks like after the courtroom doors close. Winning the case didn't bring silence. It brought consequences. Within a week of the verdict, the company's board convened an emergency meeting. I hadn't attended one in years, not since Aaron slowly edged me out under the guise of modernizing leadership. Walking back into that glass conference room felt like stepping into a former life. Some faces looked relieved, others looked afraid. The interim CEO cleared his throat. With the court restoring Mrs. Whitmore's voting rights, we need direction. All eyes turned to me. For a brief moment, I felt the old instinct rise, to soften, to reassure, to make everyone comfortable. I ignored it. I won't pretend nothing happened, I said. This company was used as leverage in a family betrayal. That ends today. The room was silent. I'm commissioning a full internal audit, I continued. Every transfer, every contract, every executive decision made in the last 18 months. One of the board members shifted. That could expose mistakes. Good, I said. Mistakes grow in the dark. The audit uncovered what Rachel had suspected all along. Aaron hadn't just moved money. He had siphoned it. Quietly, confidently, using shell vendors and inflated consulting fees. And Melissa's name appeared everywhere. She was sleeping with the CFO, the auditor told me gently, as if trying to cushion the blow. I laughed. It came out tired, almost sad. Of course she was. The affair explained the reckless confidence, the hidden accounts, the sense of immunity. When the CFO was confronted, he resigned within hours. Aaron followed 2 days later, escorted out by security he once approved the budget for. The press had a field day. Headlines shifted. The bitter stepmother narrative evaporated, replaced by words like manipulation, favoritism, and hidden truth. Aaron tried to call again. I let it go to voicemail. Then Melissa showed up. She came to the house late one afternoon, standing at the gate like a stranger. Her designer sunglasses couldn't hide the exhaustion underneath. You got what you wanted, she said when I stepped outside. Are you happy now? I studied her, the woman who had once smiled while taking my hand. I wanted the truth, I replied. Happiness comes later. She scoffed. Aaron lost everything. He lost what he took, I corrected. There's a difference. Her voice cracked. You could have stopped this. So could you. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she looked unsure. You know, she said, finally Daniel was weak at the end. I felt something flare inside me. No, I said. He was sick, and you exploited that. She flinched. Leave, I said quietly. As she walked away, her heels clicking against the stone driveway, I felt no triumph, just a deep, aching clarity. Karma didn't arrive like lightning. It arrived like gravity, slow, unavoidable. That night, alone at the house, I opened a bottle of wine and sat by the window. The lake reflected the moon, calm and indifferent. For the first time since Daniel died, I allowed myself to cry. Not from anger, from release. But just as the tears slowed, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You think this is over? It isn't. My breath caught. I stared at the screen, the words burning. Whoever sent it wasn't finished. And neither, it seemed, was my story. The message haunted me longer than I expected. Not because I was afraid, but because it reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. People who lose power rarely accept it quietly. They look for back doors, for leverage. Rachel agreed. Aaron's desperate, she said. That makes him unpredictable. We discovered what he was planning 3 weeks later. A lawsuit. Not against me, against the company. Wrongful termination, emotional distress, claiming the board had conspired to scapegoat him. He's trying to burn everything down, Rachel said. And drag my name with it, I replied. I felt tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. I had won, yes. But winning didn't erase the damage. It simply changed the battlefield. During discovery for Aaron's suit, something unexpected surfaced. A personal journal. Daniel's. It had been kept in a safety deposit box Aaron never knew existed. The bank contacted me as the executor. My hands trembled as I opened it. The entries were short, sparse, written in the shaky hand of a man aware of his decline. One passage stopped in cold and mid-caused. I feel pressure. From Aaron, from Melissa. They say it's for the good of the family. I don't feel safe arguing anymore. If something happens to me, I hope she knows I never meant to hurt her. Tears blurred the page. Another entry followed, dated 2 days before his stroke. I need to fix this. I made a mistake trusting them. If I don't wake up tomorrow, I hope the truth comes out. I closed the journal, my chest tight. This was the missing piece. Rachel entered it into evidence. Aaron's lawsuit collapsed within days. But karma wasn't done. Melissa's affair became public through the audit. Her divorce from Aaron turned vicious. Assets frozen. Custody contested. Friends vanished. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she blamed me for everything. That was fine. Blame was cheaper than accountability. Months passed. The house felt different now. Quieter. Mine. I redecorated the study, donated some of Daniel's old suits, started volunteering at a legal aid clinic for women navigating inheritance disputes. I listened more than I spoke. They all thought they were alone. They weren't. One evening, as I prepared Thanksgiving dinner for myself, the doorbell rang. Aaron stood there. He looked older, smaller, no suit, no confidence. "I just wanted to see you," he said. I studied him for a long moment. The boy I once tried to love. The man who betrayed me. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. I nodded. "That's honest." "I lost Melissa," he said quietly. "The company. Everything." "I know." He looked up. "Do you hate me?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said, "but I don't trust you." He swallowed. "That's the consequence," I continued. "Not anger. Distance." He nodded, tears forming. "I hope you find a better way forward," I said. "But it won't include me fixing it for you." He left without another word. I closed the door gently. That night, I sat at the table, eating turkey and mashed potatoes alone, watching the snowfall. I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Not the naive peace of forgetting, but the earned peace of facing betrayal and surviving it. Still, as I turned off the lights, I knew the final chapter of this story wasn't about Aaron. It was about what I would build next, and whether I could learn to choose myself without guilt. Because revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about reclaiming your life, and that I was just beginning to do. Rebuilding a life after betrayal doesn't happen in dramatic leaps. It happens in quiet, almost invisible choices. I began by changing my mornings. For years, my days had started around Daniel's schedule, then Aaron's. Meetings, crises, expectations that weren't mine. Now I woke up when my body told me to. I drank my coffee on the back porch, wrapped in a sweater, watching the lake change color with the light. I learned how much peace exists in an unclaimed hour. The legal aid clinic became my anchor. Every Wednesday afternoon, women sat across from me at a scarred wooden table. Some were widows, some were grandmothers, some were still married, but already being erased. They spoke in hushed voices, as if betrayal were contagious. "He says I don't understand finances. They changed the will without telling me. My son says I'm being selfish." Each story carried a familiar ache. I didn't tell them what to do. I told them what I had learned, that silence benefits the powerful, that discomfort is not the same as danger, that asking questions is not disloyal. One afternoon, a woman in her late 50s clutched my hand after our session. "You make me feel less crazy," she said. I smiled softly. "You're not crazy. You're waking up." At home, I finally opened the last box from Daniel's office. Inside were old photos, letters, things I had avoided because they hurt too much. One envelope caught my attention, my name written across the front in his handwriting. Inside was a single page. "If you're reading this, I didn't fix things in time. I hope you forgive me. I hope you fight if you need to. You were always stronger than you believed." I pressed the paper to my chest and cried for the man I loved, not the man others tried to turn him into. Aaron didn't contact me again. I heard through the community that he moved out of state, chasing a smaller job, a quieter life. Melissa disappeared entirely. Her name surfaced only in whispered cautionary tales. That was their karma. Mine was quieter. I hosted Thanksgiving the following year, not out of obligation, but choice. Friends from the clinic, a neighbor who had lost her husband, a retired teacher who brought pie and stories. The table was mismatched. The laughter was real. As I watched them eat, I realized something startling. I wasn't lonely. I had been afraid of being alone for so long that I confused it with emptiness. But this space I'd carved for myself felt full. Later that night, I stood by the window again, the same one where months earlier I had cried into a glass of wine. The lake reflected my face back at me. Older, softer, stronger. I whispered into the quiet, "I'm still here." And for the first time, I truly believed it. The final revenge didn't come from a courtroom or a headline. It came a year later in a place I never expected. I was invited to speak at a women's leadership retreat, the kind held in old lodges with creaky floors and too much coffee. The topic was resilience after loss. I almost declined. Public speaking had never been my goal, but something told me to say yes. I stood at the front of the room, looking out at rows of women whose faces reflected pieces of my own past. Wives, mothers, executives, caregivers. "I want to tell you a story," I began. Not about revenge, about recognition. I told them about the will, the betrayal, the fear of being dismissed as emotional, dramatic, greedy. I spoke about how quietly power can be taken, especially from women taught to keep the peace. "And here's the part no one warns you about," I said. "When you finally stand up, some people won't recognize you anymore." Heads nodded. "They'll say you've changed," I continued. "They're right. You have. You stopped disappearing." Afterward, a woman approached me, eyes bright. "My brother did this to my mother," she said. "I didn't know we could fight." "You can," I told her. "And you should." Driving home that evening, I felt a deep sense of completion. Not closure, completion. The story had come full circle, not by erasing the pain, but by transforming it. At home, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my journal. I wrote about how revenge isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about refusing to be rewritten, about choosing dignity over silence, about letting karma do the heavy lifting while you rebuild. I closed the journal and looked around my home. It no longer felt haunted. It felt earned. If you're listening to this story and something inside you feels stirred, pay attention to that. It's not anger, it's recognition. You are allowed to question. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to walk away from people who benefit from your silence. And if you've ever been excluded, underestimated, or quietly betrayed, know this. Your story doesn't end where they tried to erase you. It begins where you decide to stand. If this story spoke to you, take a moment to like it. Share your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe for more stories like this because you are not alone and your voice deserves to be heard. Thank you for listening.